They thought he was weak. Another quiet black man who kept his head down and avoided trouble. When the prison doors slammed behind him, nobody knew who he really was. Not the guards, not the inmates, not even the warden. He never spoke much, ate alone, slept with one eye open. But the way he watched, calm, precise, it was like he was scanning a battlefield. Then one day, it happened. A prison gang cornered him in the laundry room. 5 men, shanks in their hands, smirking. They thought it would be an easy target, a fresh fish to make an example of. But the moment the first punch came, everything changed. The quiet man moved like lightning, controlled, ruthless, efficient. Every strike landed with military precision. In 10 seconds, the fight was over. The guards rushed in, but it was too late. The gang was down, gasping, bleeding, terrified. Only then did the others realize this wasn't just another inmate. This was a man trained to end wars before they even begin. And prison had just made him angrier. Stay with me until the end, because what they discovered about that man's identity would rewrite everything the prison thought they knew. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Marcus Thompson had been inside Riverside Correctional for 3 weeks when the Scorpions first noticed him. They ruled the East Wing with an iron fist, collecting debts, controlling contraband, and making examples out of anyone who didn't show proper respect. Marcus wasn't showing respect. He wasn't showing anything at all. Every morning, he'd walk the same path from his cell to the cafeteria. Same measured steps, same neutral expression. He'd sit at the corner table back to the wall, eyes scanning the room like he was memorizing every face, every movement, every potential threat. The other inmates whispered about him. Some said he was scared. Others said he was planning something. Nobody guessed the truth. Marcus had learned to read rooms long before he learned to read people. In the mountains of Afghanistan, a misread situation meant body bags. In the jungles of Colombia, hesitation meant death. Here in Riverside, surrounded by concrete and steel, the same rules applied. Assess, adapt, survive. The conviction had come fast. Too fast. Armed robbery, they said. Security footage that somehow materialized overnight. Witnesses who appeared out of thin air. Marcus knew he was being framed, but the evidence was airtight. The trial a foregone conclusion. Someone wanted him buried, and they'd done their homework. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed prison would break him. Tommy Razor Martinez ran the Scorpions with the kind of cruelty that made hardened criminals look away. He'd been inside for 8 years, working his way up from a scared kid to the most feared man on the block. His crew of 12 controlled everything that mattered: commissary, protection, information, and respect. Marcus's silence was disrespectful. "You see that new fish?" Razor asked his lieutenant Carlos as they watched Marcus methodically fold his laundry. 3 weeks, and he ain't paid tribute, ain't even acknowledged us. Carlos nodded, his scarred face twisting into a grin. "Want me to have a conversation with him?" "Nah. I want to send a message. Get Rico, Snake, and Big Jim. We're going to teach this boy some manners." What Razor didn't know was that Marcus had been listening. Not because he was eavesdropping, but because situational awareness was as natural to him as breathing. He'd cataloged every member of the Scorpions within his first week. He knew their routines, their weaknesses, their hierarchies. He knew this confrontation was coming. He'd been preparing. The laundry room was perfect for what Razor had in mind: isolated, soundproof, with only one way in or out. Marcus was alone, folding uniforms with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. When the 5 men entered, he didn't look up. "You got a hearing problem, fresh meat?" Razor's voice echoed off the concrete walls. Marcus continued folding. His movements were steady, unhurried, but his peripheral vision had already mapped the room. Rico to his left, favoring his right leg from an old knife wound. Snake behind him, hand twitching toward the shank in his waistband. Big Jim blocking the door, overconfident because of his size. Carlos to his right, trying to look tough but keeping his distance. And Razor directly in front, close enough to smell the cheap cologne he used to mask the scent of fear. "I'm talking to you." Razor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Marcus finally looked up. His eyes were calm, almost bored. "I heard you." The dismissal in his tone made Razor's jaw clench. "You think you're better than us? Think you can just ignore the way things work in here?" Marcus set down the uniform he'd been folding. His movements were deliberate, measured. "I think you should walk away." The room erupted in laughter. Snake pulled his shank, a piece of sharpened metal wrapped in tape. Rico cracked his knuckles. Big Jim moved away from the door, confident that his presence alone was intimidation enough. "Last chance," Razor said, pulling his own weapon, a razor blade melted into a toothbrush handle. "Pay up, or we're gonna carve some respect into you." Marcus stood slowly. He was tall, but not imposing, lean, but not threatening. Everything about his posture suggested submission, defeat. The Scorpions saw what they expected to see, another victim about to learn his place. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first punch came from Rico, a wild haymaker aimed at Marcus's head. Marcus didn't dodge it. He redirected it, using Rico's momentum to send him crashing into the washing machines. The sound of bone meeting metal echoed through the room. Snake lunged with his shank, but Marcus was already moving. A quick strike to the wrist sent the weapon clattering across the floor. An elbow to the solar plexus doubled Snake over. A knee to the face put him down for good. Big Jim charged like a bull, using his size as a weapon. Marcus sidestepped at the last second, grabbed Jim's arm, and used leverage to send 300 pounds of muscle into the concrete wall. Jim hit hard and didn't get back up. Carlos tried to run, but Marcus caught him at the door. A single blow to the back of the neck dropped him like a stone. Through it all, Razor stood frozen. He'd seen prison fights before, brutal, sloppy affairs that usually ended with someone bleeding out on the floor. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. Precise, clinical, professional. Marcus turned to face him, and Razor saw something in those calm eyes that made his blood turn to ice. This wasn't anger. This wasn't even violence. This was a job being done by someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. "Who are you?" Razor whispered, the razor falling from his trembling hand. Marcus took a step forward. "Someone you should have left alone." The guards found them 10 minutes later, alerted by the sounds of the brief struggle. 5 members of the most feared gang in the prison, unconscious or barely conscious, scattered around the laundry room like broken dolls, and Marcus calmly finishing his laundry as if nothing had happened. Word spread through the prison like wildfire. The quiet new fish had taken down the Scorpions. By himself, without breaking a sweat. The story grew in the telling. Some said he'd used kung fu. Others claimed he'd fought with his bare hands against knives. Everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't normal. Prison fights were messy, desperate affairs. This had been something else entirely. Something that spoke to training, discipline, and experience far beyond what any street thug could possess. As Marcus was escorted to solitary confinement, inmates pressed against their cell bars to get a look at the man who'd just rewritten the prison's power structure. He walked with the same measured steps, the same neutral expression. But now, everyone was watching for something different. They were looking for signs of who he really was. The warden's office was a monument to bureaucratic power. Awards lined the walls, commendations from state officials, photographs with politicians. Warden Harrison had run Riverside for 12 years, and nothing happened in his prison without his knowledge. Nothing except this. He stared at the security footage for the 4th time, his coffee growing cold as he watched Marcus Thompson dismantle 5 armed men in under 30 seconds. The timestamp showed the entire encounter lasted exactly 28 seconds. 28 seconds to completely destroy the prison's most feared gang. "Rewind it," he told his head of security, Captain Mills. Mills had seen enough. His 20 years in corrections had shown him every type of inmate imaginable. Gang leaders, serial killers, men who'd survived wars on the streets. But this was different. The efficiency was surgical. The movements were textbook. This wasn't learned in any prison yard or street corner. "Sir, I've run Thompson's file 3 times. Marcus Thompson, 34 years old. No military record. No martial arts training. No history of violence. Clean record until the armed robbery conviction." Warden Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. "Then explain what we just watched." Mills shifted uncomfortably. Maybe the file's incomplete. Maybe someone scrubbed his background. The warden's eyes narrowed. In 12 years, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that Marcus Thompson was not who he appeared to be. The way he'd assessed the room before the fight started, the calculated strikes, the complete absence of emotion afterward. This was a professional. "Get me everything on Thompson. Real everything. Birth records, school transcripts, employment history. If he sneezed in 3rd grade, I want to know about it." Meanwhile, in the isolation wing, Marcus sat on his narrow cot, staring at the concrete wall. The cell was 8 by 10 feet, barely larger than a closet. Most inmates cracked after a few days in solitary. The silence, the confinement, the complete absence of human contact, it broke minds faster than any physical torture. But Marcus had trained in environments far worse than this. Buried alive in desert sand for days at a time, locked in shipping containers in sweltering heat. The military had taught him that comfort was a luxury, and suffering was just another mission parameter to overcome. The isolation also gave him time to think. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to put him here. The evidence had been too perfect, the witnesses too convenient. Professional work, which meant professional enemies. His mind drifted back to his last mission, Operation Silent Thunder. The details were classified beyond his security clearance, but he remembered the target, a weapons dealer named Kozlov, who'd been selling advanced military hardware to terrorist groups. The mission had gone perfectly, too perfectly. Kozlov was eliminated, but not before he'd revealed something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Someone in the Pentagon was feeding him information. Someone with access to classified operations. Someone who knew which missions were being planned and when. Marcus had reported it through proper channels, but the investigation had stalled. Bureaucratic red tape, they'd told him. National security concerns. 3 months later, he was arrested for armed robbery. The pieces were starting to fit together, but Marcus knew better than to jump to conclusions. In his line of work, paranoia was just another word for survival. But the timing was too convenient, the evidence too clean, the conviction too fast. Someone wanted him silenced, and they'd chosen the most effective method possible: bury him alive in the justice system. A steel door clanged open down the corridor, followed by heavy footsteps. Marcus didn't move, but his senses sharpened. 3 guards, based on the sound, moving with purpose, not routine, coming his way. The footsteps stopped outside his cell. A key turned in the lock. "Thompson, you've got a visitor." Marcus looked up at the guard. A thick-set man named Rodriguez, who'd been watching him with obvious curiosity since the laundry room incident. "I wasn't expecting anyone." "Yeah, well, she wasn't on the schedule either. Lawyer, she says. Flew in from Washington this morning." Washington. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold, concrete walls. Nobody in Washington should know where he was. His case had been handled by a public defender in the local courthouse. No federal involvement. No high-powered attorneys, which meant either someone was trying to help him or someone was trying to finish the job. "Let's go," Rodriguez said, stepping aside to let Marcus exit the cell. The walk to the visitor's room felt longer than usual. Other inmates watched from behind their bars, whispers following in Marcus's wake. Word had spread about what happened in the laundry room. The Scorpions were finished as a power in the prison. Razor was in the infirmary with a concussion. Big Jim had 3 broken ribs. The others were walking, but barely. and Marcus had done it all without sustaining so much as a scratch. The visitor's room was sterile and unwelcoming. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, scratched plexiglass separating inmates from their guests, phones that crackled with static and picked up conversations from other booths. But the woman waiting for him looked completely out of place in the dingy surroundings. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most inmates made in a year. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from winning cases in federal courtrooms. Marcus sat down across from her and picked up the phone. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Sarah Chen. I represent certain interests in Washington." Her voice was crisp, professional, but Marcus caught the slight emphasis on certain interests. Not a law firm? Not the public defender's office? Something else. "I didn't request a lawyer," Marcus said carefully. "No, you didn't, but someone requested me." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even though the phone system made their conversation semi-private. "Someone who's very concerned about what happened to you." Marcus studied her face, looking for tells. The slight tension around her eyes suggested stress. The way she held her shoulders indicated she was carrying weight, responsibility. But her gaze was steady, direct. Either she was telling the truth, or she was very good at lying. And who might that be? Sarah glanced around the room, noting the positions of the guards, the other visitors, the security cameras, someone who knows what you used to do for a living, someone who knows that Marcus Thompson, the armed robber, is a fiction. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His cover identity was supposed to be bulletproof. Years of careful construction, backstopped by the best forgers in the intelligence community. If someone had cracked it, that meant they had resources. Serious resources. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Marcus said evenly. Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Colonel Marcus Ghost Thompson, Delta Force, 12 years of service, 47 confirmed kills, last assigned to Joint Special Operations Command, Task Force Green." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. The cover identity wasn't just blown, it was obliterated. And if this woman knew who he really was, then others did too. Which meant he was in more danger than he'd realized. "The question is," Sarah continued, "are you ready to find out who put you here? And more importantly, are you ready to do something about it?" Marcus stared at her through the scratched plexiglass, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. This could be a trap, an elaborate setup designed to extract information or eliminate him entirely. Or it could be exactly what it appeared to be, a lifeline thrown by someone who knew the truth. Either way, it was better than rotting in solitary confinement. "I'm listening," he said quietly. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Then let's talk about Operation Silent Thunder. And let's talk about why someone was willing to destroy your life to keep you quiet about what you discovered." Marcus leaned back in the plastic chair, his face betraying nothing as Sarah Chen spread documents across the small table between them. The manila folder contained photographs, classified documents, and intelligence reports that shouldn't exist outside of secure government facilities. Operation Silent Thunder was supposed to be routine. Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Extract Kozlov, gather intelligence on his weapons network, eliminate the threat. Clean and simple." Marcus studied the photographs, surveillance shots of a compound in Eastern Europe, satellite imagery showing heat signatures and movement patterns, all of it bringing back memories he'd tried to bury. "But it wasn't clean, was it?" Sarah continued. "Because you discovered something that certain people didn't want discovered." The memories came flooding back. The mission briefing, the insertion, the moment everything went sideways. Marcus had been trained to compartmentalize, to lock away operational details until they were needed. But seeing these documents brought it all rushing back. "Kozlov talked before we eliminated him," Marcus said finally. "He mentioned a source, someone feeding him classified information about American military operations." Sarah nodded grimly. Someone with access to the highest levels of the Pentagon. Someone who knew which missions were being planned, which targets were being selected, which assets were being deployed. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The implications were staggering. If someone in the military hierarchy was selling information to arms dealers, how many operations had been compromised? How many soldiers had died because their missions were leaked? I reported it through proper channels, Marcus said. My commanding officer assured me it would be investigated. Colonel James Morrison, Sarah said, pulling out another photograph. Your handler for the last 3 years of your service. Also the man who signed off on your mission reports. Also the man who had access to your real identity when the frame job was constructed. The photograph showed Morrison in dress uniform, accepting some kind of commendation. But Marcus was looking at something else in the background of the photo. A figure partially obscured by shadows, but familiar enough to make his blood run cold. Is that Kozlov? Marcus asked, pointing to the shadowy figure. Sarah's expression darkened. Taken 6 months before your mission. At a Pentagon reception for foreign military contractors. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Morrison hadn't just been his handler. He'd been feeding information to the enemy. And when Marcus had gotten too close to the truth, Morrison had arranged for him to disappear into the justice system. Morrison framed me, Marcus said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. Morrison and others. This goes higher than one corrupt colonel. We're talking about a network of military officials, defense contractors, and government agencies, all profiting from selling American secrets to the highest bidder. Marcus stared at the documents, his mind racing. If Sarah was telling the truth, then his imprisonment wasn't just about silencing one inconvenient soldier. It was about protecting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American military command. Who do you work for? Marcus asked suddenly. Sarah hesitated for a moment, glancing around the visitors' room. Let's just say there are people in Washington who still believe in justice. People who've been watching this corruption spread for years, waiting for the right moment to act. And I'm that moment. You're the only person who can testify to what Kozlov told you, the only living witness to Morrison's betrayal. Without your testimony, we can't bring down the network. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. There's just one problem. I'm stuck in here for the next 20 years. Sarah smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Actually, that's where things get interesting. Your case is being reviewed by a federal appeals court. New evidence has surfaced that calls into question the validity of your conviction. She pulled out another set of documents. Surveillance footage that was mysteriously deleted. Witness statements that don't match the physical evidence. Financial records showing payments to key witnesses in your case. Marcus felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed by years of military training. Hope was a luxury that got people killed. How long? Weeks. Maybe less if we can prove prosecutorial misconduct. And in the meantime? Sarah's expression grew serious. In the meantime, you need to stay alive. Morrison knows you're here. He knows what you represent. And he's not going to let you walk out of this prison to testify against him. As if summoned by her words, the lights in the visitors' room flickered. Marcus's combat instincts kicked in immediately, his senses sharpening as he scanned for threats. Through the reinforced windows, he could see unusual activity in the prison corridors. Guards moving with more urgency than normal. Inmates being herded back to their cells. Something's wrong, Marcus muttered. Sarah looked around nervously. What do you mean? Before Marcus could answer, the door to the visitors' room burst open, but instead of a guard, 3 men in civilian clothes entered. They moved with military precision, their hands resting on concealed weapons beneath their jackets. Time's up, Thompson, the lead man said. His voice carried the flat, emotionless tone of a professional killer. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Private military contractors. The kind of men Morrison would hire for jobs that required complete deniability. They weren't here to arrest him or transfer him to another facility. They were here to eliminate him. Sarah Chen's face went pale as she realized what was happening. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. she whispered into the phone. Plans change, the lead contractor said, stepping closer to the plexiglass barrier. Mr. Thompson, you're going to come with us quietly, or this is going to get very messy very quickly. Marcus stood slowly, his mind already calculating angles and possibilities. 3 men, all armed, all trained, but they were in a confined space with limited exit routes, and they clearly wanted him alive long enough to move him somewhere more private. I don't think so, Marcus said calmly. The lead contractor smiled coldly. I don't think you understand your situation. We own this prison right now. Half the guards are on our payroll, the other half are being dealt with. You can walk out of here with us, or you can be carried out in a body bag. Through the windows, Marcus could see more contractors moving through the prison corridors. This wasn't a simple assassination attempt. This was a full-scale operation designed to extract him from federal custody without leaving any witnesses. How many men? Marcus asked. Enough, the contractor replied. Now move. Marcus looked at Sarah through the plexiglass. She was reaching into her briefcase, her movements careful and deliberate. When her hand emerged, she was holding a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. I wouldn't do that if I were you, the lead contractor said, noticing her movement. Too late, Sarah replied, pressing a button on the device. The prison's emergency alarm system erupted in a wail of sirens and flashing lights, but Marcus recognized the pattern. It wasn't the standard lockdown alarm. It was something else entirely. Federal agents are en route, Sarah announced, her voice carrying over the chaos. This facility is now under federal jurisdiction. The contractors exchanged glances, their confidence wavering. This was supposed to be a clean extraction, but Sarah had just turned it into a federal incident. Within minutes, the place would be crawling with FBI agents and U.S. Marshals. Change of plans, the lead contractor said, pulling his weapon. We do this the hard way. But Marcus was already moving. The years of Delta Force training kicked in, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. He grabbed the plastic chair he'd been sitting in and hurled it at the plexiglass barrier. The reinforced material cracked, but didn't shatter. The contractors opened fire, but Marcus had already dropped below the level of the barrier. Bullets sparked off concrete and steel as he crawled toward the door, using the chaos to mask his movement. Sarah was on the floor, clutching her briefcase and speaking rapidly into a radio. Fortress is under attack. Repeat, Fortress is under attack. We need immediate extraction. Marcus reached the door and peered around the frame. The corridor beyond was in chaos. Regular prison guards were engaged in firefights with the contractors, while inmates shouted and banged on their cell doors. Emergency lights bathed everything in a hellish red glow. This was his chance. In the confusion, he could disappear into the maze of corridors and find a way to survive until federal help arrived. But that would mean leaving Sarah behind, and she was the only person who could prove his innocence. The decision took less than a second. Marcus turned back toward the visitors' room, where the contractors were trying to flank around the damaged plexiglass barrier. Sarah was trapped, pinned down by gunfire, her radio crackling with urgent voices. This way, Marcus called to her. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and adrenaline. I can't move. They've got the room covered. Marcus studied the angles, calculating fields of fire and cover positions. The contractors had made a tactical error. They were focused on Sarah, assuming Marcus would try to escape. They hadn't considered that he might come back for her. On my mark, run for the door, Marcus told her. He didn't wait for her response. Instead, he grabbed a fire extinguisher from the corridor wall and hurled it through the damaged plexiglass. The barrier finally gave way, showering the room in crystalline fragments. The contractors spun toward the new threat, giving Sarah the opening she needed. She sprinted for the door as Marcus dove through the shattered barrier, rolling across broken glass and coming up behind an overturned table. The lead contractor was fast, but not fast enough. Marcus's military training had prepared him for exactly this kind of close-quarters combat. He came up from behind the table like a coiled spring, his hands finding the contractor's weapon and twisting it away in one fluid motion. The man tried to fight back, but he was dealing with someone who had survived firefights in 3 different war zones. Marcus's elbow connected with his solar plexus, doubling him over. A knee to the face put him down permanently. The second contractor was already turning his weapon toward Marcus when Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The corridor beyond the visitors' room had filled with tactical teams wearing FBI and U.S. Marshal vests. They moved with the same precision as the contractors, but their purpose was entirely different. Instead of eliminating witnesses, they were here to protect one. The remaining contractors realized they were outnumbered and outgunned. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands, but Marcus could see the calculation in their eyes. This wasn't surrender, it was strategic withdrawal. They'd live to fight another day. As the federal agents secured the scene, Sarah approached Marcus. Her professional composure had cracked slightly, revealing the fear and adrenaline underneath. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Marcus checked himself for injuries. A few cuts from the broken glass, some bruises from the fight, but nothing serious. "I'll live. But this changes things." Sarah nodded grimly. "Morrison knows we're on to him now. He won't wait for the appeals process to play out. He'll try again." "Then we need to move faster," Marcus said. "How long before you can get me out of here legally?" "The federal review process is already underway. With what just happened here, we can expedite everything. Days, not weeks." Marcus looked around at the chaos the contractors had left behind. Guards were tending to wounded colleagues. Federal agents were processing evidence. The entire prison was in lockdown, but it felt different from before. Less like a cage, more like a temporary inconvenience. "What about Morrison and his network?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "That's where you come in. Your testimony about what Kozlov told you, combined with the evidence we've been gathering, will be enough to bring down the entire operation. And after that, you disappear again. New identity, new life, the kind of fresh start that most people only dream about." Marcus considered this as the federal agents began escorting him toward a secure holding area. A new identity meant leaving everything behind: Marcus Thompson, the framed convict, and Ghost Thompson, the Delta Force operator. He could become anyone, go anywhere, start over completely. But first, he had to survive long enough to testify. And if Morrison was as desperate as Sarah suggested, that might be the hardest mission of his career. As they walked through the prison corridors, Marcus noticed how the other inmates looked at him now. Word of the laundry room fight had spread, but this was something different. The federal agents, the tactical teams, the obvious importance being placed on his safety, all of it marked him as someone significant, someone worth protecting, someone worth killing. The cell they put him in was different from the others. Reinforced steel instead of standard bars. Electronic locks instead of mechanical ones. 24-hour surveillance with rotating guards. It was less like a prison cell and more like a safe house. But Marcus knew better than to feel secure. Morrison had resources, connections, and the desperate motivation of a man watching his empire crumble. The attack on the prison had been his first move, but it wouldn't be his last. As Marcus settled onto the narrow cot, he began planning for what came next. Morrison would try again, but next time he'd be smarter about it. More subtle, more careful. The game had changed, but the stakes remained the same. Marcus's life hung in the balance, and the only way to tip the scales was to survive long enough to tell his story to the right people. Outside his cell, federal agents maintained their vigilant watch, but Marcus had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who looked like allies. The real battle was just beginning. So there you have it. The quiet man they thought was weak turned out to be one of the most dangerous soldiers America ever produced. Marcus Thompson wasn't just some random inmate who got lucky in a fight. He was Colonel Marcus "Ghost" Thompson, a Delta Force legend with 47 confirmed kills and a classified service record that read like something out of a Hollywood movie. The Scorpions learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. They saw a quiet black man who kept to himself and assumed he was prey. What they got instead was a predator who had been hunting far more dangerous enemies in places most people couldn't even pronounce. 28 seconds was all it took to dismantle the most feared gang in Riverside Correctional. But this story goes deeper than just a prison fight. It's about corruption that reaches the highest levels of military command. It's about a man who discovered the truth and was buried alive in the justice system to keep him quiet. And it's about how even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crumble when faced with the truth. Marcus Thompson's real war wasn't fought in some desert compound or jungle clearing. It was fought in a prison laundry room, then in a visitor's room under federal siege. And just like every other mission he'd ever been given, he completed it with the precision and determination that made him a legend. The inmates at Riverside still talk about that day, the day they realized that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous.